Boston. I went to Boston with $35 in my pocket that McCarthy Coyle paid me to be in a commercial. I'm a terrible actress. The only criterion he had was that all the actors have red hair. It was a public service commercial, and I played a young woman who was pushing her little red-headed baby up to the child care center and dumping the kid and saying, "Sorry, son, I've got to get off to work." And off I went. And then the commercial cut to the next scene where I was in a wheelchair and a tall 35-year-old red-haired man was pushing me up to the nursing home. He said, "Mom, I'm sure you're going to like it here just fine. I've got to get off to work." It was McCarthy's idea. He did the entire script for the commercial. And he paid me $35, and it was 1983, and there was a huge recession, the biggest recession since the 1930s, and I had no money and no jobs. Nobody would hire me. I tried to get a job at the Grizzly football stadium selling refreshments, and they asked me in the interview what special qualifications I had, and I said, "I have a certain insouciance. I can sell these people their Coke." But I didn't get the job, so McCarthy gave me the job in the commercial, and off I went. There's an Irish ghost song. I think McCarthy would like it, and I hope I know it. I wasn't actually really planning to get up here and sing it. When he went out in the frozen night, headed for the pub, shoulders hunched up tight, his head down on the railroad track, and his old cow Delia sat loaned him back. He met with a dark and a troubled man as he passed him by, called back at him, "Hey Matty, can you see what's become of me in this country of the blind? Me house I've got is dead to me rhyming and my poetry. All I got is the beat of the stagger heading down the Coraline." But Matty passed on as quick as he couldn't stand such a crooked man sober. All he wanted was the lights of the bar, the nightingale and the wild rover. When he came in they were singing, "Ah, he's bad, got a deal, you drive you out, quit your sporting and your bailing. We don't want to hear about Bunker Hayden. Maybe you'll sing us the girls of Kilkane." The fire and tea eyed him steadily, handed him a pint of porter. "You must have seen the bishop's ghost tonight to put the dry look back in your eye." But Matty would not be taken in by their jibing and regaling. He found himself a fresh-blown crew, set in with their sporting and their hailing. When he came home in the very same spot, he met with his dark familiar. He seen him coming back down the line. He was bright and strange and fine. When he passed him by, Matty threw out his arms, tried to grab hold of his likeness. In the morning they found his frozen corpse at the foot of the Coraline. In the pub they were lashing down drops of brandy, the old-fashioned habit. In the church they were lashing down pounds and fivers, so Matty would be fine in the old by and by.
All right.
Richard Coyle burned bright. He was one of those, to quote one of his favorite poets, wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight. I was one of those people new to living in Missoula, of modest inclination, working in a healthcare project during the day, taking sporadic classes at the university at night. And he put me under his wing, and there were a lot of us there. It was a big wing. And I forget the circumstances, but it had to do with my looking up MQTV and seeing if he might help with a television commercial. And no matter, soon I was hearing about local public television, about egalitarian television, and I was watching MQTV's fantastic film, Contrary Warriors, about the Crow people in eastern Montana. And McCarthy had me signing up for the city's ad hoc community television committee, and which was chaired by a city councilor, a retired haberdasher, a Republican of the kind currently extinct, who was modest and sensible and frugal as a change purse. And this was a long way in the past when Missoula was a lot more of a small community, before we even had a mall. Missoula was a working class town with a university, and you could rent a house for a couple $100 a month. And this committee sported a vast array of different interests that McCarthy, for the most part, put together, including teachers and a public relations person from Montana Power and small business representatives and lots of nonprofit organizations like the one I worked for. And we liked one another on this committee, and we learned a lot, some of us traveling to Portland to see the big show, the community television in Portland. And we fought off the cable company's stooges who had a singular argument that what we were all doing was wasting time because what we were doing was completely illegal. It wasn't, and we convinced a very conservative city council to vote unanimously to launch the good ship MCAT. And behind the scenes, there was a constant parade of people hanging out with Mac at his house down by the river. The Borrowed Times folks, led by Goose from Bozeman, and many of whom are here tonight, and people like, I can't remember his name, but he lived up in the Swan Valley and built caskets like the one behind me here. And
Willie Von
Willie, right, Willie. Is Willie here? And Willie would go off on a diatribe about how, our last ignominious act as human beings was to get filled with poisons and get put into the ground to poison the earth. So we needed to build caskets and avoid the formaldehyde and go out helpful to the earth as fertilizer. And I always thought that was a great idea, and so did Mac, and so did everybody else. There was a lady trombone player from a feminist commune near Helena, and we took trips up to Nelson, BC with my kids and on a whim, and hung out in the hot springs in BC with the Doukhobors, who were charismatic Christians who were rescued from Stalinist Russia, plopped down in Western Canada, and we sat in the hot springs with them as they were speaking Russian, and it was all fun. We did a radio play with a movable cast of characters once a week on really late night KUFM, and we'd get together and write it in the wee hours all week after work. And anytime any character mentioned cable television while we were on the air, everyone else would whisper over and over, "The cable." And McCarthy's baritone would come on strong, "The cable." As if we were helping bring to life a new cultural age, which in fact we were. And most of us had day jobs, and a lot of us had kids, and we believed in each other, and a lot of it was good, and McCarthy had a roar. And later he had Drawing Down the Moon and went away for a while back east. And he was working secretively on a book he later called Sex in 50 States, which I at first, when talking to him, thought that was a wonderful idea, that there were a lot of states of mind to have sex with, and you could have sex with an euphoric state, or an affable acceptance, or mystical revelry, and I don't know. And then I realized it was about geography, and I thought, what an accomplishment that is. And I thought to myself, well, if I were to name the book about my sex life, it would be, well, Sex in Two New England States and Montana. And but I think I had sex in Maine once. I tried to have sex in New Hampshire, but it was cold. And Led Zeppelin was playing too loud. And I rode home to Massachusetts as usual, depressed. But the point is that McCarthy taught me how to burn brighter, and he was the best critic I ever met, a natural-born critic of human pretense, of the powerful and of the deceitful.
Right on.
He raged against the dying of the light, but not in the ham-fisted way that Dylan Thomas meant that phrase. He raged against the repression of ideas, and he raged against what, the excruciating lack of imagination that we see around today, and the slow erosion of the New Deal, and the cost of college, and another horrible imperial war, and the terrible little things like the doing away with the fairness doctrine and the corporate wasteland where there's 100 channels and nothing's on, and the lack of good investigative reporters and the dull plodding sameness of the Missoulian, and all that's dying of the bright light of promise and of the dawning of the awareness and beauty and courage and creative thought. And on our local scene, the splintering of our community television consensus, and he raged against it until he didn't really have much energy left anymore, and I'm sorry I didn't give him more comfort while he was sulking. And Richard was my brother, and he was my father, and I was his, and I will miss him.
My name's Dennis Healy. I didn't write anything. I met McCarthy when I guess he was 16. I was 12. I didn't write anything down. I'm just listening to, he was Dick, he was Richard, he was McCarthy. It was a rage. He was. He lived at our home in New Jersey for a couple of months. I guess his last few years when he was a high school student. That's where I first met him. And I always said to my mother, "Who's this?" I said, "Your brother." He would only come in late at night because there was 9 of us. My father always wondered, "Who's that one?" McCarthy and his dear friend Kevin took me to Boy Scout camp the first time away from home. McCarthy spent my last night before I went to Vietnam. McCarthy met me in San Francisco when I first came there. Matter of fact, I remember got to San Francisco and I called him on the phone and he says, "Come on, I'll take you and show you the town." His town. We were riding up in the elevator at the Fairmont Hotel. It has a big glass elevator that looks out over this Hall Street. Elevator was packed. We were going up to the Sky Room or whatever room was up there. We're riding up. McCarthy goes, "My gosh, did you see those couple over across the street, across the building, across the way?" We got off on the top floor. He and I stepped out. Everybody else down the elevator and went back down to see what was going on. On 11th Street, when he was working for the Daily News, he got his. He bought a new coat. It's kind of like the only way I could describe it was a 1865 cavalry coat. Beautiful blue jacket coming down, with a cape that hanging over the back. Bright red. I was with him the day he went over and picked it up at the tailor. And he would parade through Greenwich Village with his bright blue red cape. And he just said, "How do you like the way it flows?" He was my brother. And he was one of my dearest friends. And I didn't realize till tonight, it seems at all points of my life, wherever major change seemed to come on, every one of his faces, every one of his kind words, his encouragement to go on, do things, we'll miss him dearly. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Pat Walsh. I'm angry that Richard left and didn't say goodbye. Angry at myself for never making it here to Missoula while he was around to show me this town that he loved so much. Angry that I won't hear one more of his monologues, one more story, one more song, or hear that wonderful laughter again. Angry that I didn't get that one last dance with him or tell him one more time that I loved him. But then I do feel very blessed and thankful that he was a part of my life. I met Richard in August of '67. It was my first date with Jack. And we went to JFK Airport to see him off to Ireland. That was our first date. And from then on, a 40-year wonderful journey of friendship began. We spent much time together, and he was always there also for our major life events. He never forgot and would always send a special, though sometimes very crazy and cryptic, note for birthdays, anniversaries, the birth of our children. Our boys loved their Uncle Richard. He was a big playmate for them, and they remember sitting spellbound as he wove them yet another tale, and still to this day say he was the best Easter bunny they ever saw. On one of his visits, and he also lived with us, but there's probably not many people in this room that he didn't live with. He decided that he, Sean, and Luke, who were, the boys were 3 and 4 at the time, were going to go to a tree farm to cut down our Christmas tree. And again, it was like he got up and decided Jack was gone to work. We're going to go cut down a Christmas tree. It was freezing cold. But he didn't tell me what he was going to do with them. He was taking the boys out. So needless to say, I didn't prepare them. So the 3 of them went off on this freezing cold day. He got lost. It took him about an hour and a half to drive a half hour. They got to the tree farm, had no saw, no gloves, no hats, no boots on the kids, and he kept them out in the fields looking for that perfect tree for 3 hours. They were absolutely frozen when they got back and have resisted going to look for a Christmas tree to this day. But I know that he would have loved this crowd. Each and every one of you telling a story about him, letting the rest of the world know how much he was loved. He loved to party and get dressed up. And I can see him sitting in the back of the room, correcting our stories and laughing his head off at all of us. Like this, just before he went to sleep. And so tonight, I guess, to you, my dearest Richard, I love you and I'll miss you always.
My name is McCarthy Coyle, also
and I'm one of his many nephews. And I just also wanted to say thank you to everyone for coming tonight and sharing all of these stories. It's very special to everyone in the family, and I want to say thank you to all of you. McCarthy was a very, very fierce man. He, I think John stated it really well when he said that, and he was also fearless, not because of his great size, but because of his great strength. And he taught us all so many things. But more than anything, I think he taught us to love each other. And he often asked a lot of people, whether it was to forego common courtesies with waitresses and waitstaff, to make available to him our homes and our families. But I think everyone is here tonight because he more than repaid those debts. And he was just a wonderful man. And, I think it's redundant to say that, I loved him. I think we all loved him. And he loved everyone. He really did. He taught me about hitchhiking and going out in the world and to not be afraid of people. And he would often take me to places and I would be afraid. But what I'm trying to sum it up, and I guess the best I can sum it up is that, if there was going to be a situation where somebody was going to be upset or that someone was going to be afraid, he would just rather it be the other person. And that's something that I think is, a quality to emulate. That to go out in this world and to be fearless and to choose love and to not be afraid of people, because they give you back everything you can offer to them. And when you lead in your life with love, that's what you find on the long road. And he found everyone here, and he brought you all here tonight. And I wanted to thank you again.
I've been a friend of Dick Coyle's for over 60 years. I started in first grade with Richard. He was small. I was the second smallest in the class. He was the first. And in those, when we were small, and Richard had such a big mouth, the only way you could get back was to whack him a few times. But the trouble with Richard was catching him. I couldn't catch him. And so he'd get a real good head start on me and turn around, and he'd run backwards and was calling me names and taunting me. I have a lot of stories. I don't want to read all of them. But this one, you'd have to understand that I came from a very large family in Ramsey. And as a matter of fact, my family was larger than the Healy family.
Oh!
I don't want to answer that. My father and mother. One very uneventful day, and it was at Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi. My first sergeant informed me that my mother was in childbirth and that it wasn't looking very good. The Red Cross was in the process of checking this out. When they said it was that Dick Coyle that called, I had to admit that it was a hoax. Dick wanted me to get leave so we could hitchhike to Fort McClellan, Alabama, to visit a girl from our hometown who had called Dick and also had called me several times. She was very unhappy, crying and so on. And he was really doing something very, very kind. He wanted us to go up there and cheer her up. Well, we did. And I had to be back Monday morning. We left, it was early Friday afternoon. And they had to take and was a collection up for me so that I could get a flight back and was in Mobile, Alabama. Which was I did, and then I had to hitchhike 90 miles and was back to the base. And I was there for formation on time to go to class. This is Dick Coyle. I was at Jack Walsh's shore house in New Jersey. I hadn't seen Dick in several years. He loved to surprise people. Jack asked me to check a leak in his pot closet. It was a shocker to see Coyle leap out of the closet. He was full of himself. He loved it, especially, I think, it was to shock me. Dick enjoyed his surprise parties. I wasn't overjoyed when I learned he was throwing an engagement party for me when I wasn't engaged. He invited half of Ramsey. He was thrilled at my predicament. The party was in Christie Street in Lower Manhattan. Dick kept all the gifts. A few years later, Jack Walsh took me on a trip and it was around Newburgh. He was really said he had to make all these deliveries, and he was really needed me very, very badly. So we went to Newburgh in his big truck. There was cartons that we were delivering, I believe, and we probably delivered them to in the worst area of Newburgh that there was, and that none of these places really existed. They were just vacant buildings. This is I found out later. And so we delivered these, and I didn't even know Dick was in the area. So Jack was making phone calls here and there, and then I went back and went to my apartment with Jack, and of course he said he had to go to the bathroom. So we went into the apartment, and there was Dick in his glory, throwing me, and it was a surprise birthday party. Again, and the place was packed. I had no idea it was coming. I hadn't seen him in years, but there he was. And of course, he invited everybody. There was enough, and it was the drink where the next day, and it was that we woke up, and especially me, and I had a terrible hangover. I also got presents this time that he didn't keep. Dick was the best man at our wedding. The day before the wedding was quite messy because Dick had to have his hair done. And we had to worry about him because he was throwing a tantrum because the guy did a rotten job. So anyhow, Dick was doing a reading for me. So he went up and was the lectern. He got up there, and all of a sudden he was catatonic. He said nothing, he did nothing, he was just standing there. The priest was upset. Everybody who was in the congregation was looking, what the heck is going on here? And he got what he wanted. He got everybody's attention. Everybody was looking at him. And then Dick Coyle started with the reading. That was Dick Coyle. For all his bluster, Dick could be a kind person. I'm sure he is listening now. On his last visit to Ramsey, he went to visit and was Dennis Healy's mom. I was always the chauffeur. So I brought him up there, and she had a stroke. And this woman had 9 children. I'm sorry, she had 10 children. She had 9 Healys and 1 Coyle. Gladys always enjoyed Witch Richard's company. She was attentive to his stories, his singing, and his dancing. He was on stage. I was the driver who got him there, and after 4 hours or more, I had threatened him with desertion before he would leave. I had been due home hours before, and in bringing him to Morwa, Vincent Stick asked me if I could stop and buy him the New York Times. As an aside, I always wondered how Dick knew the words to so many songs that I realized he only knew half the words for each song. And the only song he knew from the beginning to the end was a song that he used to sing, and it was in his early years, was on the good ship Lollipop. Oh, Mr. Coyle, he made life and was more exciting. And thinking of him, your first thought might be that he was a pain in the rear. But then you begin to laugh, remembering all the crazy things that we did together, all the good times. His mother in front of me once called him a pip. He certainly was. He was also a man who was not of great height, but had a commanding voice and a big vocabulary. Richard Lawrence Coyle, that was one of his names, was my friend. May he rest in peace. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dan Coyle. I'm his youngest nephew. He was inspirational for our family, and we used to come up here in summers, spend great times with him. He showed us around Flathead Lake and took us all over to bars when we were 14. Don't worry, it's okay, you're with me. He would let us play by the freight trains there on Chestnut Street. And he took us tubing in his truck. He took us up the Blackfoot River. This one, I don't know the rivers, but he had got these tubes, and me and my brother and sister and another cousin, and he took us all in the truck, all the tubes and everything, and took us upstream and dropped us in. And I said, just get in, when you get to Chestnut Street by my house, just get out. We were sent up here on our parents sent us here, so we thought he was, the authority. Okay, we'll do it. And, we get in, we're floating away, and he looks and you guys can swim, right? There were so many stories. He was our family historian. He had all the family members nailed and explained it to us what he could. And all my friends growing up know him, and he made a mark for it. He made people remember him. So, thanks a lot.
My name is Abe Abramson. I'm a businessman. I'm involved in the real estate business in Missoula, and that's how I met McCarthy. I was one of his landlord's representatives, and that was for That was not your surprise. It got a little easier when he found out that I was O'Gorman and Dargan on the other side. Smooth things along, which he took advantage of. But when he was working on MQTV, I was representing the landlord in the bank building he was in, and he would come to me and he would say, we need a little bit more space, but we don't want to pay more rent. What do you think about that? I said, that's really a terrible idea. Let's do that. And because it was just easier than, going through the history of the oppression of the landed people. And potato famine, remember that? Potato famine. Young men in Ireland were eating 15 pounds of potatoes a day, and that's all they were eating. So, okay. So, and there was space available on the top floor of this building at the time, and so I finally one day I went down to the bank and I said, how are we doing on the top floor up there? He said, well, we haven't been up there in years. And I said, well, why don't you just give me total authority? And but I still had to go through the drill with him every time. He said, you know, right across the stairwell there's a space and nobody's been in there for a while. And we're doing this K-Ross tool thing. And I said, well, I don't know. That's a terrible idea, but let's do it. You know, let's do it. And then about the time that we were beating down the cable people and getting through the city council, he came to me and he said, now, Abe, what do you think about if we, you know, do this and ask them that they have to put this much money aside and buy the equipment and all that? I said, what the hell are you asking me for? And we all know about his finger. You know, he went, hey, you've been on the committee for 4.5 years. The last conversation I had with him was about his most recent trip to Ireland, and that was a very pleasant hour and a half. And the thing I remember walking away from that was, the next time I go to Ireland, I wanted to go with him.
I really didn't think I was going to get up and say anything. I thought I could quietly sit in the back and not be noticed, but I met Richard as a brother. My sister was Adrian's friend in California, my sister Kate, and so I knew Richard as a brother, and so I'm here today as a brother to say that he was a storyteller, like you know, and he was a great storyteller. And for being Adrian's brother, he showed up to my brother's wedding down in Helena in 1980. It was like the second time I'd ever met Richard, but he was in Richard form, or McCarthy form, and so it went long into the night, and there was plenty of Irish whiskey and plenty of marijuana, and Richard was talking up a storm as a good brother, and he showed up to this wedding of my own brothers, and he simply then was just Richard, because we'd give him a pass because he was somebody's brother. And I just wanted to say on behalf of my sister that Richard touched all our lives in his own different way, and I'm honored to be here tonight for my sister who couldn't be here, who's in San Diego. So thank you, Coyles from the Caseys, and God bless.
Hi, my name is Larry Gard, and my claim to fame in Missoula is that I'm Annie Gard's brother. And if it weren't for Annie Gard, it would have taken longer to meet McCarthy, but it's through Annie that I did meet Mac, as I met many of my friends in Missoula through Ann. And but Mac and I had this little bond that was special to us, and we had several things in common. We had Brooklyn. Ann and I grew up in Brooklyn, and Mac was very fond of Lincoln Road and stories he'd tell me about his relatives that lived on Lincoln Road in Brooklyn. And Mac was in the Coast Guard, and he appreciated the fact that I was in the Navy. In fact, I think the first time that I met him was when he was living over on Chestnut Street, and I was passing through town when I was in the Navy to visit Annie. And I have a vague recollection of him sitting there with a little cap and playing cards on Chestnut Street. We had music, which was a bond with everyone here. And I remember, one of the things I remember vividly about Mac was visiting him in his apartment up in the Wilma building. And one of my inspirations, many of you may know that Annie and I have been taking turns spending a lot of time back in Brooklyn in recent years, taking care of our mom. And I have two inspirations here in Missoula that kind of helped me to get into the mode of doing that. One is my friend George Weissel, who is, I don't think, here tonight, but took care of his parents here. And the other is Mac, who took care of his Uncle Dan for a long time up there in the Wilma building. And, you know, one of the only apartments that Mac had on his own there. One of the things I remember is Mac made all these arrangements to get people to come up to help Uncle Dan, get people to come and bathe him. And he got the Chalice of Repose people, so he called these people up. We have this institution in Missoula where these people will come and play harp music for dying people. I remember seeing the harpist up there and Uncle Dan reading the Wall Street Journal. Mac came to my house several Christmases ago and read for my girlfriend and I A Child's Christmas in Wales, and he had a way of making you feel special. This is a poem that he wrote that I like very much, and I sort of couldn't believe that he wrote it just for me, and I don't know if he did. And if he told somebody else he wrote it for you, we'll share it. But it says, "For Larry, an excellent comrade," and the name of it is "Message from a Radio Operator." A tribe of sea-born messenger angels using androgynous frequencies bounced significant static off the hull of my foundering bones. Spiritual antennae, long disquieted by the louder voices of America, begin sweeping the remorseful skies. Shipmates on the bowsprit wave semaphore flags in the frantic fog. Save our souls. Telegrapher pounds out 3 dits, 3 das, 3 dits. Across the oceanic noise of unwired voices shouting, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday." The keel plates groan and buckle. The helmsman steers in circles. The corpsman shines a penlight into our ears and says our canals are jammed, with endless dashes and dots without any points. The boatswain whistles and the chief speaks into the tube. "Now hear this, now hear this, all hands abandon ship. There are no women and children, so the captain flees into the arms of a no longer buoyant Mae West and drowns amongst the jetsam. A soaking archangel emerges from the ocean holding aloft an occidental monstrance, recovered from an ancient wreck, beaming a host of heavenly messages. The radio operator unlocks the book of codes, begins to translate as we naked survivors plunge on through the storm. Seraphic trumpets conducting our vessel around capes of fear and hope. At last, a zephyr blows us into the gulf of peace. Seawater and white noise pour out of our ears, and finally, the briny benediction is unfathomed. Illusion of God is grand, stop. All souls saved, stop. Guardian angels are being piped ashore, stop. Voice of the turtle is heard again in the land, stop. All hands are now at liberty. Stop. Go. McCarthy, 12/9/2005. That was my birthday.